Hey there, it's Courtney. Today we are at our compost facility and I wanted to show you around. What this video today is going to be a lot of me listing off kind of the material that we have. There's a lot of different phases that composting has, so I want to show you different phases, and we have different piles and different rows of material, just so then we have a baseline of what we're working with. So the easiest way for me to do this with you guys is going through each of our rows and piles and explaining what it is, how we have it, and just kind of move from one side of our facility to the other. So this is our farthest east row, and this is called a loader rick, which is this has been created by the loader, so you can see it's a lot taller than, say, this row right here. All of this is material that's completely finished and ready to be ran through our screener. The screener is that piece of equipment right there, and it's basically a giant sifter that sifts out large pieces of material versus the smaller pieces. This material right here has gone through all 5 heat cycles, and what I mean when I say heat cycles is we do what's called an aerobic composting method. When you're talking about your at-home composting and you're just throwing your food scraps or your browns or your greens into a pile and just letting it sit there, that's anaerobic, which means it's not moving, nothing's turning, it just stays, and then it just breaks down over time. What we do is aerobic, where we have to continuously turn and move this material. And every time we do it, it goes through what's called a heat cycle. It goes from, at the very coldest, it'll be your ambient temperature. And then for it to be considered a heat cycle, the heat cycle starts when it hits 140 degrees. So once it does that, it has to maintain that temperature for 5 days. And then we have to go through 5 different heat cycles. So this material right here has gone through all of that. And now it's ready to be screened and sold. This material right here, next to the loader rick, is what we call second grind material, and it's stuff that is halfway through the composting process. We've already gone through a couple of heat cycles, we've turned it a few times, and so we just need to keep moving and turning it. There are a lot of farmers that enjoy this material just because it's a higher quality of manure, but there are some people that don't want compost, so this is a happy medium between the two. These next 2 rows are both raw manure. Raw manure means that it's just come straight out of the feed yard, and we've brought it to our pad to start going through the first heat cycle. This material right here is material that we ran through our manure spreader, and when we run it through our manure spreader, it doesn't make, well, let me rephrase this. We don't know if it makes the composting process any quicker because this is the first time that we've done it, but what we use to make the heat cycles happen is called a compost grinder or a turner, and that runs over the material. Running it through the manure spreader skips the first grinding process. So both of these are working on their first heat cycle because it's been turned. So right now both of these are going through their first heat cycle. The only difference is that that row was essentially ground up a little bit better, so we don't have to run the grinder over it. This next windrow over here was just unloaded out of that trailer right there. So it was just loaded in the pens and dumped out here. All of these rows are too big for our grinder, so we're gonna, whenever we have to hit it with the grinder, Ray's gonna have to trim up the rows and to make them small enough for our grinder to go over. So here's an easy way to tell. This raw manure is just in massive chunks and it's super wet. This one, like I said, is the raw manure that came out of the manure spreader, so it's still really wet, so, but it's in, the chunks are not near as large. And then this windrow was that second grinding and it's starting to dry out. But we've still got big chunks and it's still pretty wet inside. And then this pre-screening material is dry. And you don't want it bone dry, but some of this stuff does get like that. But it's fine material that's ready to go. All right, so moving on. This is where those raw windrows were. So we're moving on to this windrow right here, which is what our planters mix is. And this is just stuff that you can put into planters. It's a mixture of sand. Let me dig into it a little bit. All right, it's a mixture of sand, broken down manure, and then organic material like straw, hay, sometimes wood chips, things like that. So now we're on the other side of that planters mix. And this windrow right here is also ready to be screened and shipped out compost. And this row goes all the way down. This row right here, this is what we call reject. It's all the material that's too big from the screener. Imagine sifting dirt with a colander. All the small stuff goes through the colander, and this is the stuff that stays on top. So we call this reject. It's usually harder, hasn't been broken down yet. So to get rid of this, it can still get broken down into smaller pieces. You just have to do what we are doing right here, which is taking the reject material and putting it on the bottom, and then putting raw material on the top. When you do that and then you hit it with the grinder, it gets all mixed up. The raw manure is still wet and has a lot of moisture to it, and the reject is typically dry. So what the reject will do, it'll suck the moisture out of the raw material, help dry out that raw material, add moisture to that reject, and then it'll just become one cohesive blend, and you'll be able to grind it up, keep that going, and then screen it out. And that's what this pile is. This is that first pile I was just talking about. This pile next to me is the same, with the raw material and the reject. These are raw windrows. These two right here. And then once we get down to here, we have a couple of rows that were created by that manure spreader of ours. And then we've got 2 rows of reject. There's some compost vocabulary that you're going to hear us say a lot. We have heat cycles that we had talked about. We've got screened material, raw manure, double grind, which is that one that was about halfway through the composting process. And then we've got reject, grinding, screening, trimming rows is something that you'll see Ray doing, where he's going in between the rows, cleaning them up and getting them ready for the grinding process. So as I'm sitting here editing this video, I realized that I never told you what we were doing next. So the main purpose of doing that last segment was so then you guys all knew what was happening on that pad. So then when you guys go with Ray in the loader, then you know where things are, what he's doing, and kind of get an idea of what's happening, instead of us just shooting material from the loader and you having no idea what he's doing. So up next, you're going to take a ride with Ray in the loader. He's going to move some material, and I'll put some captions below of what he's moving and what he's making. Thanks all so much for hanging out with us, going for a ride in the loader, and seeing what we've got going on our compost pad. We hope to see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications to see the next video. Thanks, guys.